This episode of Black Equity Podcast is brought to you by Sip and Share Wines. Head over to sipandsharewines.com to learn more. Black Equity listeners, thank you for tuning in to the Black Equity Podcast. This is the beginning of a new week, so that means we have to bring you the best information possible so you can pick up the wisdom for your week. For those that are driving, for those who are listening to this in your home, we thank you for listening to the Black Equity Podcast. Make sure you're telling your friends about us, because every single person that comes in contact with this podcast, they become transformed and they understand, hey, this is what's happening around me. I'm not out the loop anymore. I'm able to really see what's happening in Black culture. Not all that fluff, not all that other stuff that people are talking about. This is the real. So thank you for listening to Black Equity Podcast. Continue sharing, liking, and subscribing to the Black Equity Podcast. If it wouldn't trouble you, head over to the Apple iTunes page and leave us a review. Let us know what you think. And then also become a Black Equity Insider by going to our Instagram at Black Equity Network. Once again, that's at Black Equity Network on Instagram. Click on the link in bio, and you can see all the different podcasts that we promote and we talk about, and also you can become an insider. So, without further ado, let's get to this episode. Here we're going to be talking about a really great topic that I've wanted to talk about for quite some time, Africa. I want to talk about what is really going on and why don't we have the information needed about the country and the continent that we all know that we have some type of roots from, one way or another. So let's learn and let's connect with someone who has more insight than us. That's the best way to get the wisdom, is to find someone who already has the insight. So let's get to it and let's have this deeper conversation about Africa and possibly being one of the wealthiest places in the world. Hello, Black Equity listeners. Welcome to another great episode of the Black Equity Podcast. I am here today to have a conversation that I've been wanting to have for quite some time. Finding the right people to have this conversation with has been difficult. But I was able a few weeks ago to speak with Bayo from Innovate4Africa, and I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Bayo, are you there?
Yes, I am here, DJ. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on Black Equity Podcast. Just go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background and your organization.
All right, so my name is Bayo, and I was originally born. I was born in Nigeria and West Africa, and I moved to the States about 2 decades ago. Did I guess most of some of my years here, and went to school here as well. So I went to college out here, as every college student, my hope was after I graduated to get a job, in a very cool Silicon Valley company or startup. And right after college, that's what happened. So I worked on a couple of projects. I worked on some startups. I worked with some startups. Then right after that, I went on and worked at PayPal in San Jose for 6 years. So at PayPal, I worked in so many different, like, multiple projects, from working with merchants in Latin America, to merchants in Asia, to some in Europe, and also just working with them to integrate PayPal into their solutions, into their systems, and accepting using PayPal to accept payments. And I also was very instrumental in PayPal's uh, offline product rollout back in 2012, when Square came out with the card reader thing, and PayPal also rolled out a product, a solution called PayPal here, and I was actually part of the team that helped with that rollout. So, after that, after working at PayPal for about 6 years, and I just felt like, I needed to do more. I needed to uh, just uh, just focus on empowering or showcasing Africa, as a whole, from a technology standpoint, from a media standpoint, from a narrative standpoint. I think Africa has gotten a bad rap, from the mainstream media, and their how they portrayed the continent. Africa is typically portrayed as a place of, diseases and poverty and, lack of development. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying some of these things do not exist over there. They do, but also there is the, innovative Africa. There's the financially, tech savvy Africa. There is the very developed Africa, and unfortunately, these stories are not being told. The stories that are being told are the negative sides of Africa, and that's why our goal, our mission, our aim is to, first of all, change these negative narratives, and second, showcase the African innovations and the entrepreneurs and startups and businesses, and also finally connect, people, or Africans in Africa, in diaspora, with the continent and all the business opportunities that actually exist on the continent. And when I say Africans, in Africa and Africans abroad, abroad, I mean like in its entirety, totality, whether you're black in the Caribbean, in Europe, in America, you're part of the African, uh, the African diaspora. So that's the goal of our Innovate for Africa initiative.
Now, you were telling me previously, what is the percentage of the natural resources in the world for Africa?
Yeah, so Africa has 30% of the world's natural resources. Africa is the
Wow.
wealthiest continent on the planet. And in fact, for some crazy reason, Africa is also the poorest continent in the world. So something is definitely not right. When you look at a continent that has the largest deposits of mineral resources, and also the wealthiest in terms of resources, but yet that continent is the poorest, then something is definitely, not right. And there is another stat, Republic of Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. That country is, I think, probably, if not top five, but top 10 wealthiest nations on earth. But Democratic Republic of Congo is actually the second poorest nation
Hmm.
in the world.
Isn't that something? So, the wealthiest area in the world is being told to everyone over here that it is the poorest.
Yes.
How do you go from number one all the way down to whatever the lowest number would be? I could see if it was off maybe, 2 or 3 slots. If it's the wealthiest, maybe people lie and say, no, it's only number 10.
Yeah.
But literally, they put Africa, they put these different countries in Africa at the bottom of the list, but yet it's the wealthiest.
Yes, so I think, and that's when that comes with the narrative. Who's telling the story, and what's their motive, right? For the longest, the Western media, they've controlled the global narrative. They put out whatever they want to put out, and they twist the stories how they want to twist it, because at the end of the day, they have an agenda, right? So they're telling the story from an actual monetary perspective. Saying, well, if you were to look at Republic of Congo, Republic of Congo, they don't have that much capital. They don't have that much. The GDP is nothing compared to all the other countries in the world. And yes, that may be true, but then when you look at the natural resources that they have, it's in excess of $24 trillion. That's way higher. That's higher than America's annual GDP.
Right.
So and this is a country where you have diamonds, you have tin, you have columbite, you have gold. So apparently there's so many other nations. When I say nations, I mean Western nations just profiting off of these countries. Now they're getting rich and they're getting wealthy, while these countries are basically just there. And and they have certain machineries in place, certain agents in place to make sure and ensure that these countries don't necessarily rise up, to their true potentials. Because now, if these countries rise up to their true potentials, then it's going to be difficult for these countries to get exploited, and the West will no longer be able to exploit these nations. So the goal is, well, how do we keep the sleeping giant? How do we keep it asleep? Let's just make sure whatever it is we can do, let's make sure that that continent stays asleep while we extort, while we explore the resources, and while while we take all the resources and enrich our own individual countries in other parts of the world. So that's exactly what's going on in Africa.
And so there is an opportunity for investors who are listening. There's an opportunity for us here in America or I'm sorry, North America, United States, to invest and to put our time and our resources in certain parts within countries within Africa. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. Africa has a top six, I think has six of the top 10 fastest growing economies in the world. In the world. We're talking about Ghana, we're talking about Rwanda. The amazing thing is, not too long ago, Rwanda, the only thing people knew about Rwanda was the genocide.
Yep.
Rwanda is changed a whole lot, a whole lot. The
I'm reading that it's one of the cleanest cities in the world.
Yes, it is one of the cleanest cities. Kigali, one of the cleanest cities. Actually, one of the cleanest countries. You know,
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's amazing. And I say this, right? The same people that tell us that Africa isn't anything, Africa is trash, Africa is not worth visiting, are the same people that have pitched their tents in Africa and now calling it home.
Yeah,
So we here go by the negative narrative of Africa, and we just sit here and not do anything. 20, 30 years from now, uh, they will be controlling Africa.
exactly. And so here's our opportunity with this conversation and many others to come is to bridge that gap. And that's what your organization is trying to do is figure out, well, how do we bridge that gap and how do we innovate for Africa? How do we invest in Africa and be a part of that movement?
Correct. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, again, I would always say this for the longest, right? I mean, the opportunities are there. The opportunities are there. Africa has close to 1.3 billion people, right? And I mean, if we were to treat it as a country, that would be the third largest country in the world. Again,
Right,
Africa is not a country, but I'm saying if we were to categorize it as a country, you know,
right.
that would be right after India. So that's a huge potential. And Africa has the youngest population in the world. The average age is 18 years old.
Mm, mm, mm.
So in the next couple of years, or maybe a few decades from now, majority of the global workforce will be from Africa.
Right,
So and the goal is when I say we, I mean just all or just blacks in general, whether you're in Africa or anywhere in the world, we can just sit idle and just listen to the negative narrative that is being told about Africa. Again, I'm not saying that Africa doesn't have its challenges. There are challenges everywhere. In fact, I was looking at something. I can't remember. It was some I went to an event, a conference, and this guy had a couple of photos on the screen, and he was having people identify, try to guess where those places were, and it showed some really, some not too nice places in the US, and people thought it was Africa. And then he showed some really nice places, and people thought it was like Germany and Paris and the US or England. But the funny thing is, those places were actually in Africa. And the not too nice areas are actually in the West. So there is the misconception of what Africa really is, and our goal is to help people see that, look, there's more to Africa than what you hear on TV, what you hear in the on the news, what the mainstream media tell you about Africa. Africa is a booming economy. Africa has a lot of opportunities. Africa is open for business, and there's so many technology innovators, entrepreneurs out there working and just making sure that they redefine what Africa is, and how the world sees Africa.
And so, how long ago did you start your organization to begin this journey and to begin this innovation?
So I've always been passionate. To be honest, I've always been passionate about the African economy because I just believe in it, and maybe there's a little bit of a bias there because I was born there, maybe that.
Right.
But also just me seeing the just the talent and the resources out there, and every time I go, I'm just always like I'm always amazed at the things happening. In fact, a couple of months ago, I was in Nigeria, I was in Ghana, so I met a couple of students from Columbia University, some grad students. They were doing I guess it was like a study abroad type of thing. So I engaged them in a conversation because there's been this whole traditionally the when people do a study abroad program, especially when they go to Africa, there's the mindset that we're going to teach them something. You know,
Right.
not necessarily, oh, we're going to learn from these folks. So
Mm.
I sat with those students from Colombia, and I just wanted to know what's their mission, what's their goal, what's the strategy. And I was just amazed, by the conversation I had with them, and they were so, and the response was, "Oh my God, these guys are just amazing! Like they are so smart, intelligent people. Like in fact, there's nothing we can't even add anything to what they're doing. So we just
Yeah.
have to sit there and learn from them." And I feel like that's how a study abroad, initiative or program, that's what it should look like. It's not the mentality, it shouldn't be the mentality of let me go teach them something. It should be more so let me go learn how these guys are doing things. And so, yeah, there are tons and tons of opportunities out there, and it's just it's amazing. It's amazing, and we started this project a little over a year ago. But again, like I said, I've always had that. I've always I guess on the side, I've always done something relating to Africa. But officially, this movement or this initiative was started like a year ago.
So this week, I get the opportunity to dive into the second bottle that was sent through Sip and Share Wines. And the second bottle is a special edition bottle. The artwork on the front is by Deanna Heartbeat Craig. You can find her artwork at DeannaCraigArt.com. This is the Red Moscato. Now, this is for Afrofuturism. This was a special edition bottle, and so this is something I'm definitely going to keep as a keepsake. This is sweet, light-bodied, fruity, and lush on the nose with flavors of fresh strawberry, raspberry, and cherry on the palate. I look forward to diving into this bottle for the rest of this week here on Black Equity. Now, back to the show.
So you have an upcoming event in the next week or so.
Yes.
Tell us about the conference that you have for Innovate4Africa conference,
Yes.
and what is the mission, the vision, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I mean, we understand that there are amazing opportunities in Africa. We understand that the market is out there. Again, like I said, 1.3 billion people, the youngest population in the world, over 500 million plus mobile phones, about 250 to 300 million smartphones. The opportunities are just it's just huge, right? So the goal is, how do we encourage corporations in the West? How do we help them to stop thinking outside of the out of the box, outside of the box, because they're used to, when they develop things for the Western market, and then they try to just shove it down the throats of emerging markets. So it's basically like you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It's not going to work. So how do we encourage these guys to change their processes, to change their mentality and their mindset? And we call that product inclusion. So when you build a product, build it with the global mindset, and not necessarily with a narrow mindset. You're building it for North America and just Europe. And second is, how do we, the goal of the Innovate for Africa is also to showcase the amazing innovations and, and the entrepreneurs and startups that are, doing amazing things, on the African continent. How do we connect them to some of the resources available? And when I say resources, I don't mean just, funding and investment. I mean, although that's part of it, but also, how do we help them learn from more experienced people that have, for example, if you're a fintech startup in Africa or somewhere in, let's say, Kenya, and you have, let's say, a fintech executive who's black, or even if they're not black, but also very fascinated about the African economy. How do we connect those people together? Because we feel like Africa has the chance or the opportunity to actually be a lot more successful than Silicon Valley has been.
Right.
It's 54 countries, and these countries have their major markets. When fully developed, these countries, I just talked about Republic of Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. It's $24 trillion potential. So that alone, and that's a small country. So that alone is larger than the American, GDP. So imagine now aggregating all of the 54 nations across Africa.
Yeah.
The economy is huge. It's huge. So that's what we're doing, just showcasing the innovations, connecting people, and also connecting investors. Like black investors and just investors who are very passionate about the African economy. Just connecting them to some of the opportunities out there in Africa, and that's what the conference is about. It's about community. It's about inclusion. It's about financial innovation and inclusion. It's about just connecting blacks in diaspora. It's just bringing everybody all together. So that's what the conference is about, and it's happening next week, October 11 and 12, in Mountain View, Silicon Valley, obviously. Yes. So for people listening in the area, please come through.
Definitely. And I know a lot of people are excited about, now that they're hearing this, may be their first time hearing it. This is exciting because a lot of people have been wanting to invest in the motherland, what we call it.
Yeah,
And so I'm definitely excited. And I know, you and I will be staying in contact with each other, because
absolutely.
one of these trips where you're going to Ghana, or when you're going to one of these
Yeah.
countries, I want Black Equity to show up and have those, a podcast episode from there, and learning. And like you said, I'm gonna shut up and take in, where are we headed?
Yeah.
Not just putting money behind it, but also putting the time and developing those relationships, which is so key.
Absolutely.
What are some of the, in your view, what are some of the key sectors? I know we talked about mobile phones. What are some of the key sectors that people could be excited about when it comes to Ghana, Rwanda, or just different countries, Congo, different countries within Africa?
I would say that payment is major. But payments, technology, financial technology, fintech is major. Is keep in mind, you have 54 countries, and all these guys are trying to transact one way or the other. 54 countries, 1.3 billion people, and there is a lot of innovations going on in the financial space, in Africa. So that's one area, and the other space is the agricultural space. I mean, Africa is just blessed with the topography, with the climate. They have so many crops that are being planted, and so there's a lot of innovation going on in that space as well. There are a couple of agricultural technology startups that are actually becoming very major in the area. Uh, we're not able to get any one of those guys on for this particular episode of the Innovate for Africa conference, but hopefully next year we'll be able to get a whole lot more of those guys. And people are using drone technology here. They're using it to do a mapping of of farmland, and trying to do a scanning of the crops, and trying to it's amazing how things are happening, and the way Africa is just uh, adapting technologies to fit or to solve local problems. So fintech definitely one, agricultural technology another area. Then there is a lot going on in the oil and gas space as well. It's just, I mean, oil and gas is huge. There are a lot of African countries that are have large deposits of crude oil. Nigeria is an example. Angola is another one. So there are definitely some innovations happening in that space. Then the medical space. To be honest, I think it's just all round, all round. There's a lot of innovations happening and a lot of opportunities out there as well.
Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the singer Akon. Are you familiar?
I know Akon, yeah.
Okay, he was talking about investing in Senegal
Yes.
and how that's where he is saying everybody should come to.
Yeah.
Of course, everybody's still been talking about Ghana. What are your thoughts on what he's been talking about? Do you have any, I guess, any thoughts on that?
So, I mean, Senegal is one country, right? And people advertise this country for so many different reasons, right? Now, Akon may be talking about one specific sector, right? So, for example, let's say if you were talking about like innovations in gas, oil and gas, you probably wouldn't be talking about Senegal. You probably would be talking about Nigeria and like Angola and things like that. And if you're talking about like agricultural technology and innovations, you probably would be talking about Nigeria and Ghana and maybe some parts of Ethiopia and Rwanda. So I don't think he's wrong, about investing in Senegal. Senegal, I'm sure, is has a huge potential as well. I think it's also one of the fastest growing economies. But again, I think all of the countries in Africa they have huge potentials. This is literally a place that you can invest your money, and in a couple of years, you can multiply your investment times two or times three. I know startups that started not too long ago, maybe 2 3 years ago, and those guys are worth, I don't know, 4 or 5 times they were worth 2 or 3 years ago. Now
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. Now people also have to they have to do their due diligence. I'm not saying just go out there and just start investing into any and every business. There's
Right.
certain things you have to do your homework as you would here if you were trying to invest in a business here. You'd have to do a lot of homework, and your research, and before putting your money into anything. So the same should be done when you're investing in Africa. I mean, you should in fact do a little more research on investing in Africa, because it's an area that people aren't necessarily familiar with. Now, not unless you have somebody who can act as a middleman for you. I'd say that before investing, I always say that try to go, even if it's a holiday, a couple of days or one week. go and see how things are, and go and see what Africa looks like. Once you go there for a holiday, for vacation, and then you see it, then you are a little more familiar with the people and with how they do things, and then you'll be able to have a better idea of what areas to actually invest in. Again, like I said, if you have someone or a firm that can act as a middleman, then obviously you don't have to go there because you have a representation, that's out there, or that has some, connections out there that can help with the investment.
And so, where do we find that middleman, or are there apps being developed where it kind of centralizes a place that we can go to, invest in startups either through crowdfunding or things like that? I know they have that here
Yes.
in the States. Is something available that is systemized that allows us to do that?
Yeah.
Has that been developed yet?
Yeah, so there are actually a couple of companies, a couple of apps. There is for those who just want to, let's say, capitalize on like agricultural technology. There's actually a company called Complete Farmer in Ghana. There's another company called Farm Crowdy in Nigeria. So basically, what they do is they have a platform. You just let's say I'm a farmer and I'm trying to plant, I don't know, rice or tomatoes or something, and it's gonna cost me, let's say, $2,000 to do that. Just an individual investor can come in and say, "Hey, you know what? I'll fund your rice plantation, your rice farm. I'll fund that." And right after the rice is done maturing and they're ready to sell, uh, the investor gets their money and also gets a cut. I think about 20% or 30%, depending on the crop or the thing that has been planted. So there's so many different ways. And also we, as Africa, the Innovate for Africa project or team, we're also coming up with an infrastructure platform that will enable people to be, to connect and
Okay.
in some of these businesses. So that's in development right now. As soon as we get that up and running, would be more than happy to share it with the Black Equity Network team.
So who I'm looking for is you. It's just being developed.
Yes, correct. Yes.
The Innovate for Africa conference is the largest African-focused conference in North America. The conference brings together investors, innovators, Silicon Valley executives, technology corporations, and government agencies converging in Silicon Valley to engage in Africa-focused discussions around startup empowerment, job creation, human capital development, venture capital, artificial intelligence, blockchain, fintech, social innovation, government policies, and much, much more. This event will be held October 11th through 12th at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. Because you're a Black Equity listener, you will receive a discount of 25% off of any tickets that you purchase by using the code BlackEquity25. Once again, that is BlackEquity25. See you at the Innovate for Africa conference, October 11th through 12th. Now, back to the show.
That would be
So let me ask this, just to kind of touch on something that you and I talked about privately earlier. You said when you came to America, I found this very fascinating.
Yeah.
And so I want people to hear this. You came to America, you went through New York, and then you ended up in California, and you never even understood the idea of racism until you came here.
Correct.
And then I said, wow, because that's something I've had to deal with my entire life is racism. And so I said, in Nigeria, during your time coming up all the way through what we would call high school, was there anything that you experienced that you could say that it was something that you had to fight for, or you had to try to understand on a deeper level or did you just live your life and you didn't have that particular uh, something out there to try to hold you back in any way?
I honestly, I would say I just lived my life. To be honest, I just lived my life, and like I said, I didn't understand the literal meaning of race, like racism. I didn't understand that. I think, well, maybe back then, for me growing up, but I'm sure kids nowadays with the whole, media and everything, social media and things like that. I think kids are more so aware now, a lot more aware of those things. But back then, I didn't know what racism meant until I got here. I think the very first month I got here, I heard the word racism, racial profiling, racial bias probably over 100 times. And then I started to wonder. I said, you know what? Let me take some time and go figure out what this whole race and racism thing is all about. So I did some research. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So this is what it means. Okay.
Hmm.
And
Right.
I started to kind of just understand. I started to really pay attention to some of those signs, because back then I didn't really care. Like I said, I just lived my life. We didn't have to worry about much, and it was more so just go to school, graduate, become a doctor, a lawyer, engineer, get a good job. It wasn't a case of, oh well, I'm scared that the system is going to hold me back type of thing.
Right. And not to say that that's not real, but I wonder if more of us adopted that idea of, hey, I'm just going to go full for my dreams, not worry about the system. Not to say that it doesn't exist, because I know people are listening and saying, wait, there is, it does exist. But I mean, you're living proof that technically you can go build whatever you want to build, and nothing held you back.
Yes, but so there's a difference, honestly.
Break it down.
No, I said there's a little bit of a difference, right? And
Okay.
the funny thing, it's a mindset thing, and I always say that. Right?
Right.
There's a very popular song of this Bob Marley that I love so much. It's called Redemption Song. And there's a verse there, a quote there that says, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. You know, that is a very powerful thing for me, because I think a lot of the things holding us back. Again, I'm not saying that, there aren't societal or social pressures and
Right.
systems, that are necessarily, that are holding us back. But I think majority of the things that we face that is really, really, truly holding us back as a people, I think it is that mental slavery. Not unless we break out of it. It's going to be hard. And I always use the example of, and it's not going to be easy. And to be honest, it's going to take a collective work. I use the case of let's say a pet, or let's say a dog, just an analogy here. And you have a leash, around the dog's neck, and every time the dog tries to pull off, that leash keeps pulling it back for
Yeah.
years and years and years. And finally, when you take off that leash, that dog is not going to leave that radius,
Right.
perimeter, because it's been conditioned, to just stay within that radius. Not unless something drastic happens that pushes that pet out of that perimeter, out of that radius. There's a very high chance that pet will always stay within that area. So, and that's why I feel like we all have to come together as Black people. Just we need to help each other, just help each other up, encourage one another, and just be partners and be friends, and just collaborate together. And I feel that's the only way that we can solve some of these problems.
I agree. I'm all for collaboration as long as it's with people who share the same principles and is going towards the same direction. I'm all for collaboration. I agree 1,000%. So one last time for those listening, when is the event going to happen? And then at the end of this, I'll give them some information
Yes.
of how they can potentially work with Black Equity Network to receive tickets.
Yes.
So one more time about the event.
So the event is called the Innovate4Africa Conference. It's happening October 11 and 12. If you're not able to make it on the 11th, that's fine. 11th is more so a social networking session. It's not really a big deal. Saturday, that's going to be the major day. And it's, again, like I said, October 11 and 12. That's Friday and Saturday next week. So if you're around, if you're in the area, if you're not in the area but can still make it, please, come through. The theme is, technology and innovation as catalyst for the African economic development. That's the theme. We'll be having some startups, some execs, a few government folks, coming to talk, and just people just that are experts in their field, coming to talk. And the goal of the Innovate4Africa initiative, a 10-year plan, is to enable 5 million jobs across the African continent. That's a goal. And, and we definitely would like to partner with people and organizations, agencies. If you would like to just walk with us on this journey, please reach out to us.
Definitely. Well, you already know you have a strategic partner in Black Equity Network, and we're looking forward to working with you in any capacity that is suitable.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bayo, for coming on Black Equity Podcast. And I'll be sure when this episode airs to include the information for how they can receive tickets by listening to this podcast.
Awesome. And finally, just one last thing I just wanted to say. For people, and I say people, for Blacks, of African descent that will, in America and Europe that are scared to go home. And when I say home, I mean Africa. There are tons of people from other parts of the world, Western countries, Asia, that are in Africa, that are living there and claiming it as home.
Yeah. You know what I heard? I heard that there's people in Europe who vacation in Africa, during their downtime.
Yes.
They'll live in Europe, and then, like for us, like we would vacation in the Bahamas.
Exactly.
For them, their Bahamas is whatever they choose it to be in a country in Africa.
Yes. And there's nothing that you can get in Spain or in the Caribbeans, that you cannot get in Africa. Africa, if you like the coastal / beachfront type of places, there are lots of them out there. And I was actually, when I was in Ghana, I met I saw a couple of people, from Dutch, Germans, Italians, Spaniards. And I actually engaged one in a conversation. I said, hey, what's going on? And he says, hi, how are you? And I said, how long have you been in Ghana? And he says, oh, I've been in Ghana for about 16 years. And he says, oh, this is home. And guess what? Right. As crazy as it sounds, that's home for him.
Right.
And if people, who are, Caucasians are going and tapping into the resources and the investments over there and calling it home, then we as Black people, we shouldn't have a choice. We shouldn't even think twice. Again, like I said, you can go first, just go visit. A couple of days, a week vacation. There's so amazing places in Ghana you can go to and just relax and just, get to know Ghana. Amazing places you can go to in Rwanda, and there's also amazing places you can go to in Nigeria, especially if you have people or, friends and, connections that you can, that can show you around. I think that's amazing. So first is go there on vacation. That's a couple of days. And come back and and try to go back maybe every 2 or 3 years. Then you have a better understanding of what Africa really is, and you'll know that it's totally different from what we've been told.
Right, and if you come across anyone who's willing to come on the podcast and start talking about these different places, like if you know someone who understands travel in Africa and vacations and maybe has a company that does that,
yeah,
the door is open, man. I would love for them to just come on and have those conversations so we can plug people into the right people to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I have a couple of folks in mind. I just have to kind of reach out to them and see what they're up to, and I'll definitely let you know.
Thank you once again. Thank you for coming on Black Equity Podcast. This has been a very fruitful conversation, and I'm glad we got our technology working so we can have this conversation.
Thank you very much, DJ. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this conversation is a pivotal conversation in the culture. And I believe that anyone out there who's not having this conversation on their YouTube or their podcast or whatever platform that they have, they're doing a disservice to the listener. This is the conversation that we need to be having. And maybe it just so happens that it has to be here on Black Equity Podcast, where we are documenting the wealth of Black culture. I thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you leave comments and let us know, what did you think about this topic? Do you agree with what you heard? Do you disagree? Are you wanting to be involved? How involved do you want to be? Let us know. Send us a message over at Black Equity Network on Instagram. Let's get connected. Also, there will be an opportunity for you to reach out to me directly in the near future. So stay tuned to that. And I look forward to, the next episode and us continue the conversation on a deeper level. And so until next time, thank you for being a Black Equity listener, and thank you for tuning into the podcast.